the squares that come in the corners of the face. Here's a finished Rakusu with a square in the corner. Yeah, the beautiful ones. And in all four of the corners there will be these squares. The first step in doing that is to take the raw piece of cloth that was marked as squares and then to mark it out. This is very similar to the marking process we do in others, but I have... Are the white lines readable here, Bob?
There was a little bit of an interruption in your sound, but I can see it. I can see your image fine.
Oh, good. That's fine then. So basically you make two baselines to make sure you have a good rectangular baseline on each side, and then you measure it out according to the instructions that are in the manual with the measurements. Once you have it measured and marked with your white pencil, there's one little technicality, and that is that you make sure you know which way the grain of your cloth is going. And the way that I determine that is when you pull on it, when the grain is this way, it has very little resistance. I mean, it has strong resistance, it has very little give. Up and down, there's a give. So you put the grain in this direction. You're going to want to know that so that the grain continues in this direction when you sew them onto the face of the Rakusu. So what I have done so that I don't have to erase it later is I turned it over and I drew lines that show me the direction of the grain. And those lines will show up on the back of the square so they don't have to be erased once you cut it. And as in the past, anytime I'm cutting a line, I put marks like this, because when you get around to cutting it, sometimes it gets confusing. Then you take your scissors and you cut along the lines until you get 4 separate squares. Now I've already started to fold and iron my squares, but here's a sample of a folded square and another folded square. And as you can see in here, they've been folded over on those margin lines, selvage lines, and there's the direction of the grain shown on the back. So as I am showing you here now, I've been trying not to iron on the face because it gets glossy, but giving myself a little bit of moisture, a little bit of water, and then folding carefully. Now, one of the precisions with the corners is to preserve the little tiny corner in this piece and to keep it square. So the first step was to make the lines very precise. The second step is to fold along the lines in a precise way. And then I have ironed down those lines so that I can keep them. Keep the folds in place. Now the next thing, which has been a little bit of a problem for me, a little bit difficult, is to make what we call hospital corners. So I'm turning it over on its back now, and I'm going to give myself a little moisture with the water. And hospital corner is basically a 45-degree angle here, so that when you sew it, it doesn't stand a chance of poking out. And then you get those folded at 45 degrees. Now, always kind of adjusting to make sure the corner is nice and pointed and that the square is preserved, making sure it's along the line. And then ironing so that that hospital corner or 45-degree fold stays in place. Now you take pins and pin along the 45-degree line. So the line is going in that direction, and you pin right along the edge from the back. And I've been starting in the corner, and this thing tends to flop out, so I'm going to put it under. I tend to put the pin right in at the corner to preserve the corner, and then just like that. And now I've done that with another piece, and here's an example of one completely done. This is the back side. Pins are in at the back, preserving the corners, preserving that folded down edge. Once you're able to do that for all four, maintaining which way the grain is, you put that aside and you prepare the face in order to put them on it. Can you see the white line I've drawn here, Bob?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so what we've done is we've measured in 5 millimeters from the edge, and what I did was I marked it up here and I marked it down here, so it was 5 millimeters, 5 millimeters, and I said to myself, I'm going to mark this in such a way that when I put the line is outside of my 5 millimeters. So I know that when I put the square on there, I'm going to let the line show.
Okay.
Okay. So then you take your square and you do the same thing on the bottom. You measure 5 millimeters in here, and then you draw with your square, you draw this angle onto the Rakusu face. Now the next thing to do is you take your finished piece, preserving the right thing, and you'll put it in place. Now, once you've put it in place, you can gently pull the pins out, trusting that things will stay in place, and then pin, and I do it diagonally, right here, pin the entire square into place with a diagonal. And what I find is every time I do some pinning or something here, this little square wiggles and moves. So I continually change. I'm going to pull that pin out and put it in again and move it a little bit. Pins actually distort the fabric. So at some point, one of the tricks here is continually being aware of how I put my pins in at what angle. And you can play with this a few times until you get it how you like it. So let's just assume that that's good in place. And that's holding it right to the Rakusu face. And now the other pins can come out. Now you've prepared yourself a needle with white basting thread on it. And with a knot at the end of the basting thread. And now you baste this piece in place. And I've already done that on the other corner. So I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Now, can you see that?
Yes.
So now it's basted in place with white thread, a little bit to the middle so that you can sew outside of the basting.
Got it.
Okay. Now, here's one of the tricks with the sewing. I don't see, I'm not going to use my black thread to sew, but I will use my basting thread to just show you the idea. First of all, you can make a knot in your thread. Assume that this was the right colored thread and not my basting thread, because you can come up from the back here. You can kind of creep in here, and then of course make sure that your knot doesn't show. Let's say I've done that. Let's say I have a knot, which I actually don't. So this is actually my final thread, in your case blue, in my case black. And you've put a knot in there, which I am pretending that I did. Let's just pretend. Now, in order to have this, because you're going to sew all the way through to the back and to the front, and on the front the dots are going to appear, and on the back that sloping diagonal will appear. Now, in order to do that, and to be as precise as possible, make sure that your needle, when it goes in at least vertically. So unlike some of the other sewing, we're going to put the needle in, and we're going to pull it out completely. We're not going to do that continuous. And then from the back, you do the same thing. You take care with each single stitch. And now I'm just recalling something that I forgot to say about the basting. When I basted it in place, there was a possibility that the square would shift. In fact, if you just baste without paying much attention, the square tends to rotate. It follows the thread in some way and rotates. So after at each basting stitch and after each basting stitch, I observed my square to make sure it was still in the right place. And then I adjusted a little bit. And then I adjusted a little bit more, and I made sure my corners were pointy. And so, again, I took a single stitch and then would look at it and adjust it and pull it, and then take another stitch and then pull it and look. Keep adjusting so that by the time you get here, it's basted in place as good as possible. Now, here, like I said, you're going to come both from the front and the back so that you can see the sloped line in the back appear, and you can also see what it looks like in the front. Does that make sense? Stitching like that? Okay.
Yes.
That's the process. Do you have any questions that arose while I was doing that, Bob?
Which way does the grain run?
The grain runs in this direction, meaning it's tight this way and loose this way. I have a feeling we were supposed to have done that all along with all the pieces, but I didn't see it in the instructions anywhere, and I'm, we are where we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.